The political dynamics within the Islamic Republic in Iran is changing very fast, and power is moving from one segment to another segment of the Islamic Republic. And for many people, it's hard to keep track. So I'm going to give you a detailed but easy to understand way of looking at all of the different segments within the Islamic Republic and how this shift in power is happening among them. So to better understand this, you have to know that within the Islamic Republic, we have already been going through within the supreme leadership of Ali Khamenei. And everybody who paid attention to the politics of the Islamic Republic knew that the next supreme leader is probably going to be Mojtaba. And with Mojtaba becoming the supreme leader, that transition of power from the turbans to the boots will speed up. But now it even sped up more than anticipated because of the killing of Ali Khamenei and the divisions within the Islamic Republic and Mojtaba Khamenei not being even present. Because even if he was present, he's known as somebody that is not really good at speeches. He hasn't been present. There's only one video of him out there talking. But I've interviewed one of the very few people who has actually met him, somebody who was handpicked by Ali Khamenei to be his main propagandist, Mehdi Nasiri. I interviewed him on our Persian channel. And he, being one of the people who has met with him, met with Mojtaba directly, says that he is really not a good speaker. The most important skill a mullah is supposed to have, and a supreme leader, and a huge part of a supreme leader's leadership comes in the format of sermons. And Mojtaba not being good at that would mean that he would not be an effective leader. So even if he was healthy and alive and speaking, the IRGC would still have the upper hand. And that's probably why they picked him as a supreme leader. But anyways, the shift of power is from a somewhat more centralized, visible leadership to a more opaque, security-led, militarized leadership and a structure dominated by the IRGC. This means that if before the areas of the government that was directed and led by the supreme leader, meaning the parliament, the presidency, the judiciary, that was usually led by Ali Khamenei. Again, remember, these are supposed to be part of the civilian government, but all of that is fake. They were under the direct management of the Office of the Supreme Leadership and the National Security Council, and the Supreme National Security Council, which used to be under the direct leadership of Ali Khamenei. For that Ali Khamenei, all of this is not under the leadership of Mojtaba, it's more under the leadership of the IRGC and people like Vahidi as the head of IRGC and other figures like Zulqadr, who is right now the head of the Supreme National Security Council. Other people like Abdullahi and Musavi and Najat are important as well, but right now, to keep it simple, we could focus on Vahidi and Zulqadr as part of the main leadership within the IRGC. But obviously, it's not just the IRGC. We have 4 circles of power, and they overlap sometimes. It's not always easy to draw the line between them, but it is a good way to have a better understanding of how the power structure is working right now within the Islamic Republic. This is a much more accurate of looking at the division and the power struggle within different elements of the Islamic Republic. The way that Western media looks at it, which is hardliner versus moderate, is very inaccurate. It misses the point entirely. And categorizing it based on these 4 power circles and the division and the internal competition between them would give you a much better understanding of what's happening within the Islamic Republic. So the 4 factions that we are looking at is 1, the intelligence security network, 2, negotiation facing track, 3, the military core, basically the IRGC, and then 4 is the ideological pressure camp. So now let's go through each one of them and figure out who are the key people in them, what is the source of their power, how they use that power. So now let's go through each one of them, figure out who the key people in each one of them are, what is the source of their power, how they use that power, and what are their stance when it comes to the negotiations with the United States. Faction 1, the intelligence security network. The key figures in that are Mojtaba Khamenei and all the people associated with the Beit Rahbari. Basically, Beit Rahbari is the office of the supreme leadership. So all the people associated with that. So the main source of the Beit Rahbari and Mojtaba Khamenei, not necessarily Mojtaba Khamenei himself, but the position that he has. And the source of that power is the standing of the supreme leader among the pro-regime Iranian people. Basically, decades of investment of making that position seem like holy and worthy of reverence and following and even sacrificing yourself for, which involves a lot of ideological brainwashing that I went over in previous videos, so I'm not going to go over that right now. But those years of investment and convincing pro-regime people that the supreme leader is holy, the position of the supreme leader is holy, and that it's your duty to follow it and be loyal to it, that soft power is what this faction has. The Beit Rahbari is also economically rich, but not even remotely close to the IRGC. It doesn't have any direct military power. It only has military power to the extent that whatever soft power it has could be used to influence the IRGC and the Artesh, but it doesn't have its own independent military power. And the way that this office usually works is a mix of public announcement by sermons by the supreme leader, which right now is non-existent because Mojtaba is in hiding, but also with Ali Khamenei, it involved behind the scenes manipulation of different leverage points that you have. And this is right now Mojtaba's, or whoever speaking and acting on behalf of Mojtaba's, only way to use the power, making different statements, using different people. It's basically like very much like a Wizard of Oz situation where you have some degree of plausible deniability if certain statements attributed to you end up backfiring because Mojtaba or the people around him could actually use this as an advantage. Sometimes they take advantage of the ambiguity of whether or not Mojtaba said something or what his real position are. The ambiguity allows some degree of interpretation of what Mojtaba's position is, which allows him to have some plausible deniability if certain positions end up being unpopular among regime supporters. But instead of making clear, direct orders and having certain positions, even though that does sometimes happen, it's more indirectly getting different people to do different things and hold different positions for them on their behalf. And if it doesn't end up working out or ends up being unpopular among regime supporters, sometimes you could just throw them under the bus and avoid taking responsibility for it. And this is actually important because you want the supreme leadership to maintain its popularity. And remember, when I say popularity, I'm not talking about the popularity among the Iranian people, because the vast majority of the Iranian people are obviously very extremely against everything Islamic Republic related. I'm just talking about the minority regime supporters. And then we have the negotiating facing track, and this includes people like Ghalibaf, the head of the parliament, the speaker of the parliament, Pezeshkian, president, and then Araghchi, the foreign minister. And again, there is now some reports regarding Araghchi shifting allegiances from the second group to the third group, which we'll talk about. But Araghchi was supposed to be part of this group. And it's important to understand something about Araghchi, because Araghchi, as a foreign minister, is supposed to be part of the cabinet of the president and loyal to the president. On paper, that's what it's supposed to be like, but that has never been like that. The foreign minister in Iran has always been, when Ali Khamenei was alive, was under the control of the supreme leader instead of the president. And now, with Ali Khamenei dead, for a time, his boss was Ghalibaf. Before it even happened, we already guessed that this would happen on Iran Revolution Live. But what happened is that he shifted towards Vahidi, and his new boss is now Vahidi. But before that, he was part of this camp, part of this faction. And these three names are the main key people belonging to this faction. The power these people have is supposed to be from the fact that Pezeshkian is the president and Ghalibaf is the speaker of the parliament. You would think that would give them some power, but it doesn't. One thing that this table is missing is that Ghalibaf's main power comes from his connections to IRGC and some of the people who are loyal to him. Remember, the IRGC itself is not a monolith. It has different segments, and there are certain people within IRGC that are loyal to him because Ghalibaf was also at some point IRGC, and he maintains those connections. By the way, every time I say the way they use their power, after I mention their source of power, when I talk about the way they use their power, it's all about survival tactic, because there's the war that these people find themselves in is not just against the Americans and the Israelis and the Iranian people. It's also among themselves, and there's a winner take all and loser being eliminated kind of situation. And so these people are using their power and fighting for their own survival. This camp considers the Islamic Republic as a whole to be a sinking ship if the Islamic Republic is not somewhat flexible within the negotiations with the United States and come up with a deal. So right now what they're trying to do is to have some tactical diplomacy, but within the boundaries of the red lines of the Islamic Republic. Comparing this group to the previous one, this group wants to actually figure out how to come up with a deal with the United States. But the previous group, the Intelligence Security Network with Mojtaba Khamenei and the Beit Rahbari, they want to be somewhat flexible without looking like they're flexible at all. So as a faction that works behind the scenes and pulls on different levers, they consider the second group as to be one of their levers, but they want to maintain their distance from them whenever the pro-regime people find their actions to be too much in violations of the ideals of the Islamic Republic and too much in betrayal of Islam and weak against Americans and Israelis and too much of a capitulation to the American demands. The first group wants to be somewhat more flexible, but he uses the second group as a way to demonstrate flexibility. And as soon as they see some degree of pushback from pro-regime Iranians against this apparent weakness by the Islamic Republic diplomats against the Americans, then they would then come out and put out statements out there that shows that they are more in line with the third camp, the Vahidi camp, rather than the second camp, which is the Ghalibaf camp. Again, regarding the second camp, with Ghalibaf as the main figure in it, Ghalibaf is also very much motivated by just not dying. It's not just about making the Islamic Republic survive. Ghalibaf's understanding is that if we go back to military operations, he might be the next on the to-kill list. So that also motivates them on trying to get a deal with the Americans. Going to the third camp, which is the most powerful one of them all right now, is the IRGC, is the military corps, with the main figure here being Vahidi. Again, other people are important as well, like Zolqar, Abdullahi, Nejat, Musavi, but Vahidi is right now, as the head of IRGC, the most important person here. And their power base is basically military might. It obviously dominates in that regards. And that right now is the most important power to have. And this is why there were reports that IRGC abandoned the second group and taking direct orders from Vahidi instead of Ghalibaf and Pezeshkian. The IRGC's position regarding the negotiations with the Americans right now is that they're against it. But even if there is to be negotiations, their position is that there shouldn't be any talks regarding the Islamic Republic's uranium enrichment capability and the enriched uranium that it has. So nuclear shouldn't be part of the discussions, and also the missile ranges shouldn't be part of the discussions. If there is going to be any negotiations with the Americans, this should be off limits. Even though that's the position of the IRGC, it is possible that if the American blockade continues to be successful, and even on top of that, if there is some military operations that puts even more pressure on the Islamic Republic, it is possible for us to see the IRGC coming to a position where they are so desperate that they have to rethink this position. And this is where the fourth group comes in. And this is why at some point we might see some conflict between the third group and the fourth group. Because the fourth group, which we'll go over right now, is the least flexible one. And at some point, if the IRGC needs some degree of maneuverability on the negotiating table, it is the fourth group that is going to be a limiting factor to the IRGC, and something that the IRGC at some point might need to deal with, and something that at some point we might see signs that the IRGC will be suppressing the least flexible fourth group. And it's interesting because we predicted that at some point we might see that happening. And in the conflict between Tasnim News and Raja News, we saw signs of that happening. And I could get into more detail about this in the next video if you're interested. But right now, let's talk about the fourth group. I just want to emphasize again that we mentioned that at some point we're going to see a conflict like that between the third group and the fourth group. And then it happened. That shows that we know what we're talking about. But the fourth group, and this group is somebody that finally some people are talking about. We have been talking about them for a while. But I hope more people start paying attention to this group, which is the Paydari camp, or the ideological pressure camp, with the main person in this camp being Saeed Jalili. There are other important people within this camp as well. The other people within this camp are members of Parliament Sabiti Nabavian, Mir Bagheri, Mahsouli. But the most important person within this camp is Jalili, and he's right now a member of the Supreme National Security Council. These people are considered to be the most hardline, the least flexible, even the most aggressive when it comes to their demands of the Islamic Republic to just keep fighting. They're considered to be the least pragmatic. If you actually look at their arguments, even though sometimes these people are considered the most ideological and the least pragmatic, I can see how they see themselves as actually the most pragmatic ones. And again, if you want me to explain this in future videos, I'll do it. I want to make sure these videos are not too long. Also, you could come to our discussion group and ask me about them. The link is in the description and or in the bio. You could also scan the QR code here if you want to join our discussion group and talk to me about all of this. But this fourth group, which sometimes we refer to them as the Paydari camp, sometimes we refer to them as the Jalili aligned people, showing how important Jalili is within this faction, are the most rigid, least flexible people within the Islamic Republic. Their problem is that they have very limited military power. Their power is mostly soft power. But among regime people, they have a lot of that, because their views are the most reflective of pro-regime Iranians. So pro-regime Iranians are more expressive with their support when it comes to the supreme leadership. But the supreme leadership is not as clear with their extreme jihadi positions as this fourth camp. And the supreme leadership has a position where pro-regime people are emotionally connected to. But when it comes to taking clear, most jihadi, most in line with the Islamic Revolution ideals, positions, when it comes to taking positions like that very clearly and very directly, it is the people within this camp that the pro-regime Iranian people find themselves aligned with politically. So ideologically, they represent the demands of the regime supporters, and their source of power is basically that pure ideology and using media that is aligned with the Paydari camp. And that's how they exert their influence. And more recently, because the Islamic Republic was forced to bring pro-regime people into the streets for the past 2 months as a way to stop an uprising by anti-regime Iranians, they came up with this actually kind of smart move by having the pro-regime Iranians protesting and demonstrating in the streets every single day and night for the past 2 months, because as a way to avoid another uprising like what happened in early January, given that the Islamic Republic found itself unable to suppress another uprising, given that so many of their suppressing apparatus was destroyed by the Israelis and Americans, this was their way of trying to avoid another uprising happening. But by doing that, given that these pro-regime people, many of them are more in line with the extreme positions of the Paydari camp, the Jalili people, this fourth group that I'm talking about, this basically created an army and another source of influence and it's another source of putting pressure on the Islamic Republic to give in to this maximalist demands that the pro-regime Iranians have. So that made this Jalili faction more powerful because it gave them a civilian army. They don't have any armed forces under their control, but these people have turned into the streets as a place for them not to just support the Islamic Republic and not just to stop an uprising, but also to make demands of the Islamic Republic. And at some point, if this gets too annoying for the IRGC, we might see the IRGC wanting to suppress not just the anti-regime Iranian people, but also some of the pro-regime Iranian people as well. And obviously the position of this group regarding the negotiations with the Americans is that it's treason, that the people involved with it are Zionist spies and with their enemy and stuff like that. So that said, I want to make sure these videos don't get too long so you guys actually watch it. If you want me to go into so much more detail, because I can't go into so much detail, again, the link to our discussion group is in the description and or the bio or the QR code that you see on your screen right now. I'm there almost every day, so come talk to me over there. And also, please leave a comment telling me if this was educational or helpful or interesting. Sometimes I go through these comments, and when I see that you guys are learning from this or enjoying this or finding it interesting, it really gives me motivation to make more videos like this, and I need the motivation, so thank you for all those comments. My name is Armin Navabi. I'm Israel Chai. Long live America. Javid Shah. Payande Iran.